Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Friday morning West Coast time space show program. I'm your host, David Livingston. Thank you very much for tuning in to one of our more popular topics, spaceport development and spaceports. Um, there's a lot of uh, issues about the demand for them. Can they be private sector and be economic? Do they have to be government? What about the management of them and the management of traffic from them? Well, we're very, hold on, I gotta silence the phone call here. My mistake for not doing that up front. Um, we're very lucky to have Karen Jones with us, and she is at the Aerospace Corporation. And she and her associates wrote a paper in July of last year, so it's very current, called Spaceportopia, a primer for successful launch site planning. So we're going to discuss that with her. Stick around a few minutes after the program ends. I want to focus on Karen and what she has to say, but I will make the usual space show announcements and tell you what's on board for us in the coming few days and for next week when I will not be available for the show. So Karen has been a space show guest before, but she's a space economist and technology strategist at the Center for Space Policy and Strategy at the Aerospace Corporation. Her full bio is on our space show website for her bio. And again, she has been a guest before with us, and we're very happy to have her with us. And again, the paper with her co-authors, Spaceportopia, a primer for successful on-site planning. So it is linked to on our Substack page and also on the Space Show page. Karen, there you go. Great. Welcome to the Space Show again. Thank you for being with us. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you. Glad to be here.
How'd you come up with the word Spaceportopia?
It was a little bit of just being influenced by another book called Astrotopia, which did focus quite a bit on the exuberance in the space economy now. And, looking at how do you really plan in a way that's grounded in reality. And so the idea was to look at spaceports, the successful ones and the not so successful ones, and come up with a story on how do you do this in a way that meets regional planning needs, that meets business forecasts, and that is reasonable for the future as well. How can you do that in a way that that will make success not only for the region, but for the various launch customers as well? It's a very complex process. It involves a lot of uh, different considerations, a lot of operational parameters as well. So that's how we decided we really need to focus on the good, the bad, and the ugly. Where are the successes? Where are the failures? And where are some challenges? And we developed a model and came up with 5 key success parameters for spaceport planning as a result of that study.
So we track the number of launches globally and also by the private sector companies like Rocket Lab and SpaceX. And we see the number of launches, they go up every year so far, which is good news. Is that sufficient to make some assumptions to go out and raise money for a spaceport?
There's always assumptions, but there's also sensitivity analysis. And you need to plan under a range of forecasts. For another paper I wrote, we looked at blue sky forecasts, and those are high upside potential, possibly based upon disruptive forces, bull market potential, base model, and bear. But then we also looked at other things. For instance, what else could affect the future launch market? Um, I hate to bring up this word, but the Kessler effect. Could that happen? Let's look at that too. What if we have a disaster in Leo? The other thing that's interesting to me is the lumpiness of launch demand. With these mega constellations being deployed primarily in LEO, low Earth orbit, at some point they're launched, these mega constellations are deployed, and they have several years before you need to replenish. So that model definitely showed an upward trend, but it looked like two camels humps. So you have a dip before it goes up again with the replenishment. So smart forecasting, understanding all the possibilities is absolutely necessary. And the spaceports themselves must think about those forecasts and how they can be adaptive given those different models.
So, are we handling the demand for launches with spaceports now? And most of them, I guess, are still federal. So, and I'm talking about the United States. I mean, I do understand there are spaceports elsewhere, but I can't imagine that they're going to attract a lot of launches because I don't see the launch business coming out of Europe and a lot of other places. So I guess we can talk about that later in the show. But SpaceX seems to be meeting their demand in Texas and with their launch site in Florida that they have. Rocket Lab meets their demand with Virginia and I guess New Zealand. Blue has their private resources plus the Cape. Um, are we in need of a lot of new spaceports? Is there a reason to perfect our planning and our financing and all of what would have to go through? Because, oh my God, we're going to need a lot more launch space than what we have. Is that on the horizon? Is that 20 years out, 5 years out, or we're okay for a while?
So, in looking at how do we plan for this and all the uncertainties, I'll start with a word congestion. We have a lot of spaceports, but a few of these spaceports are absorbing most of the traffic. And so there's significant congestion at both Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg. We're not seeing a lot of demand for other spaceports like Spaceport America in New Mexico, et cetera. So there's all these other spaceports going, hey, what about us? And, there's reasons for that. You need an optimal site. But what the government's worried about is congestion at these spaceports, and they want to see more there. So one of the themes is to make the existing spaceports more efficient. And as part of that, there should be, better planning, better payload prep on site to improve or increase the cadence at existing spaceports rather than siting new spaceports. We're just running out of good places to site these things. And if you look at coastal property, which is typically ideal, you have sensitive wetlands, you have very, very busy maritime and aviation corridors as well. So you're bumping up against other industries. And so then it's kind of a zero-sum game. So ultimately, we have to make the existing spaceports more efficient. And then, of course, you have overseas and you have the UK, and they've had a few different spaceport failures. Recently, Prestwick up in, I think that's in actually Scotland, failed. But some of these different areas are getting public funds to plan spaceports without really thinking about what it means and how much money it will bring to the region. And they're not necessarily looking at it through the lens of reality in some cases. So there's a history of failed spaceport planning. Now, in some cases, it's good to investigate and look at, could this work? But the question is, when do you basically throw in the towel? And ultimately, it's about opportunity costs. If you're building a spaceport, what else could that site offer the region other than a spaceport? So regional planners must think about that as well.
Sherry, you have your hand up.
Yes, I don't know if you're going to go through the different spaceports there are in the United States. Of course, if you do, that's fine. But I'm specifically interested in the one that's It's on the drawing board for Las Vegas, and I live in Las Vegas, so that's why I ask, what is your opinion about that one? Or do
Oh
you
boy,
know?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
But what I think it would be good to do is to talk to the planners and find out, did they get a grant or some type of funding? Is it just exploratory or is it further than that?
Actually, David probably knows more than I do about it. David?
Well, I don't want to spend much time on it,
Okay. Okay, that's fine.
but the problem with Las Vegas is that there's very little airspace that makes room for anything other than commercial and military traffic. And the guy who is promoting it says that he has gotten a corridor approved by the FAA around the Pahrump area. So for people who don't know Las Vegas, Pahrump's about, depending on traffic, maybe 40 minutes to the sort of northwest of Las Vegas. And that, and he's planning on two companies that are making, everybody sitting down, single stage to orbit, horizontal takeoff, horizontal launch vehicles that do not exist yet. So this was a big focus of my dissertation because at the time I wrote it, all of these private sector companies were promoting SSTO to orbital tourism, and every one of them went under. And
Yeah.
the constellation companies, I forget the name of them, but also Motorola's satellite radio and all that, everything went under. And I had one engineer from Boeing who my advisors at Stanford and Boeing told me I had to talk to, who compelled me to rewrite an entire 50 or 60 page section of my dissertation because he took me through the engineering and structural analysis of what it would take to do SSTO and survive multiple launches and re-entries because of the structural strength and what that would mean for mass and payload capability. Now, granted, 20 years later, we've got new materials and new developments, but he's basing it on these two companies, and you never hear anything about them. I don't know the progress of them on SSTO, and I really don't know the degree that that corridor exists. But like Spaceport America, Sherry, he says he's going to have all these tourist facilities at the spaceport. And he's going to fly the tourists out by helicopter off the roof of the famous strip hotels so they don't get stuck in Las Vegas traffic, so they can go out to the spaceport and take classes and do zero gravity flights, parabolic flights, and all of this. And they will, have a 15-minute journey by helicopter from the roofs of all of this. Now, I've not seen anything where any of this is permitted, and I don't know of any helicopter tours in Las Vegas that take off from the rooftops of the Strip Hotel. I mean, there are a lot of tours by helicopter in Las Vegas, especially going out to Hoover Dam and Lake Mead in that area. So I put it up on my skeptical list. But he is a very active promoter. He is very well connected. He probably has the capability of raising money, but he's dependent upon factors and a corridor that personally, just me, I'm skeptical about. So whether you can consider this a real spaceport or not, I don't know. But Karen, I was real active with the space show when the Oklahoma port was being approved and designed. And I'm from Oklahoma, and I really wanted that spaceport to go. And every place I turned and looked into it, this thing stunk to high hell of graft and corruption. And then comes Spaceport America. And I remember I was up at a conference in Logan, Utah, and out comes the state of New Mexico had hired a consulting firm to do their planning and everything, a very famous consulting firm. in someplace on the East Coast, and they issued that report when I was at the conference, and it said, this is not economic. You can't do this report.
Yeah.
You're better off building high-speed transit between Santa Fe, which is the capital of New Mexico, to Albuquerque, and then down to Las Cruces.
Yeah, the opportunity cost is real. Absolutely.
So Governor Richardson didn't like this. He wanted a spaceport. So he had New Mexico State which is in Las Cruces, reissue the report. And lo and behold, it's glorious for economics. And all these really poor counties like Donna Ana passed a special sales tax because they thought the revenue was going to be coming in and it could fund their education, it could fund all sorts of stuff. And then they were going to have all these tourist facilities and resort hotels. None of it existed. Then they found out the runway was sited wrong. They had to redo the runway because in the desert, winds come up in the afternoon, and the runway was going right into the winds, and that's a big issue for launching a rocket. I mean, on and on and on. And look
This reminds me of Spaceport, Michigan, which is in our papers. A very similar story. Plus, they projected jobs in the range of 40,000, and after a study, using input analysis, they figured, well, not 40,000, more like 650 jobs. So when you really do the studies, you realize, this isn't so economic. And not only that, they also did not coordinate with Canada. They're going to be shooting these rockets over Canadian airspace and over a freshwater body that supports drinking water for 40 million Americans. None of that was in the initial planning.
So anyway, I mean, some of this stuff is exuberant and everyone was really excited. Virgin was going to do 1 million launches from there. How many? I didn't count Virgin on my hands, right? Maybe they will improve. So anyway, I hope that answers Las Vegas. I've tried to get the guy back on my radio show. He doesn't respond to my emails, which to me is a sign that he doesn't want to face the public with any serious questions. He'd rather give a press conference and everybody write down what he said. AJ, you have your hand up.
Yeah, two things. One of them is that I have done, lots and lots of calculations, analysis, and stuff like that for AFRL for a single stage to orbit hypersonic vehicles, scramjets, etc., or two stage or something. It is not possible to close a single stage to orbit vehicle. So that's just not going to work. And that's just bullcrap is what I'm saying, And to rely on that to such an extent that it can become a huge quantity, a huge number of things. And I would say the same thing about for that British company, which was also trying to do the same thing, single stage to orbit, which is just not going to happen or work. That's one thing. The other thing is that this is an interesting thing that I had a meeting with the staffer for Senator Scott from Florida. I should not say his name, doesn't matter. But one of the first thing, and that this was to talk about Moon and Artemis and all those other things and other ideas that that I have. But one of the things that he mentioned right off the bat was, hey, we don't have enough spaceport type of things or enough ways to have this high cadence that we are expecting. Now, he said, I asked him, why do you expect such high cadence? He just said that is because there is all this traffic to the satellites going up, communication satellites, but also Golden Dome. So he said that, Golden Dome is going to require a lot of cadence and, of course, the satellites and, commercial and all that kind of a thing. I kind of told him that you're putting cart before the horse. We don't have that kind of um, possibilities, right? I mean, right now, meaning golden dome possibilities. That golden dome may or may not work out, etc. So you are putting cart before the horse in this case, and we have to, take that into account. What do you think, Karen, about that?
Well, I'm going to take the angle of space as public infrastructure, and that's how Florida is classifying launch. So I'm answering indirectly, but
Yeah.
they're actually classifying launch as public transportation in order to get tax exempt and low interest bonds. And while I have no real problem with that, the
Mm-hmm.
problem involves mixing that type of investment with your typical low risk investment like a toll road. And if
Mm-hmm.
you bundle these municipal bonds
Mm-hmm.
and you sneak in a space launch site, damn, that could really change the risk profile significantly.
Yeah.
So I think we need transparency when this type of thing happens. And hopefully there will be with this type of municipal bond they want to issue for spaceports. Obviously, Florida has a lot invested, and they do have very successful business clusters, space business clusters in Florida. But transparency is really needed here. If you think
Mm-hmm.
you're investing in a public transportation bond and you find out it involves a space launch site, uh,
Mm.
I think that's a problem. That's perhaps hiding the risk.
But the public regulates that spaceport. Doesn't that count as a public transportation location if it's regulated by the government
Well,
public?
if it's publicly owned, yeah, but this is public transportation. I just feel like that's um,
A large percentage of public using it, actually, that's public
yeah,
transportation,
yeah, as
right?
a bus or train,
Bus
yeah.
or a
But this
train or
is
something.
a little different, especially with the participation of the private sector in it
Right.
as much as it is. So I think we just need to be careful.
Right.
Um, I know in your report you listed some parameters for how you forecast and do this. Can
Yeah.
you sort of brief us on what you think one should do to try to do a legitimate economic analysis for a spaceport? And also, I'd like to know what happened with Georgia, because we were hearing programs for years. This is a great port. It's on the Atlantic
Yeah.
Ocean. It's got a great corridor out into the water, and zip, nothing. So
Okay.
what
I'll
happened
start.
in Georgia?
Should I
Yeah,
start
if
with
you can.
Georgia and go and then lessons learned kind of broader? Because I learned a
Okay.
lot from studying the Camden, Spaceport Camden in Georgia.
Hmm.
The site itself actually had some hazmat on it, so that the site itself, where the launch pad would be, was not pristine, but it's situated in wetlands, surrounded by,
Hmm.
beautiful areas. And I remember listening to a podcast, and the launch site developer referred to it as a blank slate. And these have, beautiful homes and resorts, and it's not a blank slate.
Hmm.
The site itself, of course, made sense, the exact site, but that trajectory and what it was flying over was certainly valuable.
Hmm.
So 100 miles, this nature conservation nonprofit group really had to push back on a lot of the planning that was being done. The citizens themselves were unprepared. They didn't know, well, what is the spaceport and what will it do? And there was almost no transparency initially with the planning, so they had no idea what it would bring to the region. So the citizens themselves had to get up to speed with what did this mean? Actually, Spaceport Camden was one of the inspirations for writing this paper with my colleagues.
Hmm. Hmm.
Where is it today?
Uh,
Is it a dead duck or is
It's
it?
a dead duck now. Yeah, it's done. And of course, they're competing with Florida. And I think that was also something that might have been misguided. Instead of competing with other regional interests, you should join because it's a really regional infrastructure, a spaceport, rather than something that's local. So I felt like that was not necessarily the right direction as well. So they didn't really look at the regional economic planning that already existed. They didn't conduct an economic analysis that was very rigorous. Certainly, and these were the lessons learned, which we pulled from both Spaceport Michigan and Spaceport Camden. So without the rigorous economic analysis and without building transparency and trust with the local stakeholders, they didn't have a lot to stand on. And public-private partnerships, which this probably would have been, are often opaque, and they can distort public interests. I also think, like a lot of spaceports, there's a certain level of irrational exuberance in what they thought the growth or forecast could be, which is, David, obviously something that you keep questioning. I think we all do. Space is still new enough where there's so much uncertainty. Will this growth continue? And then finally, when you think about a spaceport, it might be a lot like a stadium in some ways. It will bring intermittent traffic to the area, but will it build a long-term ecosystem that can help the region? So looking at a spaceport, you really have to think of it as a cluster, and how are you going to build other types of compatible businesses that can generate the type of prosperity and that fits in with regional economic planning?
Did Georgia have the infrastructure around that spaceport to bring in launches, rockets? I mean, how was the material going to get there to be launched and to be serviced? Did they have the highways for it? Did they have the rail for it?
They had, I think they were connected enough to the highway system to, it wasn't on an island, as I understand. It wasn't remote. It wasn't
Okay.
super remote. I think in that sense it was fine. And it was a coastal property from a trajectory perspective, it would go over the ocean. Of course, it went over a lot of real estate before going over the ocean. So there was that as well. But ultimately, I truly think it was the lack of transparency. So the local stakeholders really were not certain whether it would be good for their region.
Do we
And I don't
need
think the developers answered that question.
do we need the demand and the capacity that spaceport would have at least assumed to have given us? I mean, that's one of the questions I wonder. Are we running short of demand? Do we really need more capacity right now? And when will we probably need it?
Well, it's still early enough where, I have this chart with bull market, bear market, Kessler effect, and there's a ton of different scenarios. But beyond the demand curve, there is the concentration within certain spaceports that are creating the real bottleneck. And bottleneck analysis is, kind of a business operations issue, which is, you want more channels to serve the market so you don't end up with a few bottlenecks. So I do think we need diversity of launch sites. That would help, but ultimately better efficiency at these bottlenecks will be a way we can handle it as well. And looks like there's a question
Amir,
from Amir.
you want to jump in?
Yeah, Karen, you mentioned the Kessler effect, and I wonder if in your studies you got some better sense than the most of us about where we're standing in terms of its chances.
I'm going to leave that for a space debris expert to answer in detail, but it's of course been a concern for a long time for most of the space community. To the extent we can extend the life of our satellites, to have fewer satellites up there, to create more convergence around missions on one satellite instead of 10, that's all going to help. But we're not seeing that right now. We're seeing just the reverse. We're seeing a discussion about broadband in, provisioning from space, orbital data centers. So right now it's so hard to understand what the demand will be and what the projections will be because of this, what we're calling this market exuberance. So I'm hoping that we'll get a better picture of the years as things settle down and we get a better perspective. I wish I could answer that question regarding Kessler, but obviously the more objects up there, the greater the the probability of a collision, and then of course, several collisions, and eventually Kessler effect could occur.
AJ, you want?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, obviously, latitude. I think you mentioned five items that you consider as important. Latitude probably is being one of them, obviously, for easterly, because you get the orbital relief or velocity relief, 1,345 or something like that feet per second for Kennedy. But if you're going north or just north,
Yeah.
then you don't need that. So
Yeah.
for polar orbits and stuff like that. However, when you are going to polar orbit, you are probably crossing, going over a lot of populated regions, most likely. Like you mentioned about Michigan going over Canada. And
Right.
if you are doing the same thing from any other place in the country, within the country or something somewhere there, you're going to go over a lot of the northern United States also at the same time. So that um, is that a problem? What if you were to go instead of going north, if you go south? Were those trajectories also considered or not for polar?
Yeah, polar or high inclination orbits,
Yeah.
basically to get, sun synchronous type of
SSOs,
system
yeah.
is important for a lot of different types of space missions. I will say that that's increasing in popularity, but there's some good places to do that where the trajectory is over a vast Arctic Ocean. So I view polar orbits as, or some of these launch sites as ideal. And you have the UK, Saxford, they're
Yeah.
planning
Right.
a really good remote spot for polar orbits.
Oh,
Canada is as well. So we're seeing Norway as well. A site
Mhm.
called Andoya also has a good site. These are emerging locations. They're
Mm.
counting on sun synchronous orbits as becoming more popular.
Yeah.
And certainly orbital data centers will want
Yeah.
those
Right. Yeah.
types of
We'll want
orbits
those.
as well.
Right.
So I like that. I haven't really studied my co-author,
Mhm.
one of two. We have Lindsay DeMarshy and also Dr. Priyanka Dopade from New Zealand. She's very familiar with the Southern Hemisphere and some of the planning around some of those other sites as well.
That's interesting. Very interesting that, yeah, so the SSOs, all those kinds of orbits that Elon Musk is talking about, putting a lot of orbital data centers in them, etc. Although, I mean, I'm not sure what's going to happen there, but still, at least there is a lot of discussion of that. So I think it'll be interesting to see what those things lead to. And that can be
Absolutely.
done from the West Coast also, I presume, the same way, and Alaska.
Yes. And
Right.
Alaska, yeah, we have Kodiak. Is it
Yes.
Kodiak? Yeah. So
Kodiak
we'll
Islands. Right. Yeah.
have other sites available at some point. If
Right.
that happens, I mean, it's still a relatively new concept with a lot to think about.
Hmm. Hmm.
I
Interesting.
know before we started, you said you weren't really all that up on sea launch or offshore sites. Um, do they factor in? Can they? I don't really know what the infrastructure development cost would be. The people that I have talked to that claim they do it, they obviously have business plans and assumptions that make it work. But
Yes.
I'm a skeptical old coot, so I don't usually take things at face value. Um, but I see logistics in trying to go offshore, and I also see you probably have to do some kind of changes in your hardware and your launch infrastructure to go offshore. Um, can it pick up enough demand for a big rocket? Because I know the one guy who I'm thinking of, they're not doing it with big rockets. They're trying it out
Right.
with pretty small rockets. But
Right.
Musk talks about putting his Starship offshore because it'll be too loud to do onshore. And
Right.
I don't even think that's feasible because he'd have to go so far offshore and then for the people that might be on it to come back to any place useful in the United States or whatever the country was. They have to have transportation to get back to civilization, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah, it's
skeptical that it can pick up
yeah.
a lot of demand, but what are your thoughts?
I don't know how scalable it is. I can see doing that and being successful, one-off here and there, but to do this on the type of cadence that some of these projections are showing, that's, as you said, David, that's really a logistical type of endeavor that, just adds to the cost and complexity. So I find that kind of difficult, but then for smaller rockets, there might be some niche applications. What I like about it, though, is getting out and away from aviation corridors and maritime corridors. That part of it is very compelling. So it remains to be proven ultimately. Of course, you may have followed the trajectory of sea launch, and they were successful before the invasion of Crimea. They had a Ukrainian company involved in the endeavor, and eventually that joint venture fell apart. That was over 10 years ago. So it has been proven, but can it be proven at scale to make sense from a business perspective? I think that's the wild card hanging over offshore launch.
What is cluster theory that you talk about in your paper?
That goes back to Michael Porter and how he looks at local economies. And some examples of successful business clusters would be like Silicon Valley, Hollywood for film, and even Sonoma. I'm picking California clusters just arbitrarily, but they're all successful because they have all like-minded businesses that support each other, working to create together to create this economic success. And as we think about spaceports, as we think about different types of space infrastructure, cluster theory is an important part of that. It focuses on what Michael Porter was a Harvard business professor, and I think he studied this in the 1990s. He called it the economies of agglomeration, and that arises within clusters of complementary industries with related technology, skills, and infrastructure, and other types of linkages. So as we think about spaceport planning, I really think cluster theory should be part of that, working with regional economic planners to go, what would that cluster look like? Who needs to be part of it? I think Spaceport Houston is a good example of that. They call themselves a spaceport, but they won't launch, but they have a strong economic space cluster. Florida overall has been very successful with these different space clusters. Then you get back to, we mentioned the Georgia Spaceport Camden. I'm not sure they would have had that cluster. I don't think Spaceport Michigan did either. You have to look at pre-existing infrastructure and businesses. Now, can they build it? Sure, but that needs to be part of the plans.
What about Wallops? Do you think that can have that?
I think it's building it. Yeah. And in fact, it's the local economy has started to see an injection of I'd say capital. Some of the part-time hotels that were open just part of the year are now open full-time. Same with some of the restaurants. So I think they're enjoying a little bit of that cluster. I don't know if it'll ever be as powerful a business cluster as what we see around Cape Canaveral, but I think it's got that.
But so there's some potential, halfway potential, unlike, say, Georgia or something like that,
Yes.
probably.
Karen,
you had mentioned before we began 5 items or 5 different things that you would consider important for consideration of a spaceport. Can you talk about that? What are those 5 things?
Yeah, it's what I kind of already went through, but one is just look at these regional hubs, look at regional compatibility, really talk to the regional planners, not just municipal planner, not if you have a piece of land somewhere. You have to look at the whole region. And then you have to look at something called the counterfactual method. If not a spaceport, then what? Because if there's another better opportunity for that land, that's what they should be doing, not the spaceport. So it's very important. And that's that I've noticed a lot of spaceport planners are just, looking through a straw just
Yeah.
at spaceport. You have to
Right.
look at what else it could be. So regional compatibility, then conduct a very rigorous economic analysis. That involves something that I think is needed called input-output analysis. Look at the existing jobs and talent in the region to see if this could work and could amplify the local space economy. Transparency and trust. I should have listed that as number one. Be very transparent with what you want to do and how it's going to impact the region. Without that, you're not going to build trust and it's not going to happen. And then four, this is the one that David keeps talking about, as we all keep wondering about, which is what is the forecast? Do we put all our eggs in this basket? Are we guilty of irrational exuberance? Try to avoid that. Let's not assume orbital data centers will take off. By the way, if it does, it's going to increase the launches cadence tremendously. But I think we have to be conservative. And the fifth one is what we discussed, which is really look at these clusters and how can you pull that together in a smart way to amplify the impacts, social and economic, for the region.
Very interesting.
What
I would like to, yeah.
what is your strategy to curtail or to maybe guide others in toning down the irrational exuberance?
Oh, I'll tell you, for the space industry, it's hard because there's the word space exceptionalism. It's
Yeah.
and it's actually a very likable trait in terms of intellectual curiosity about what's out there, and it's really kind of unpopular to try to dampen some of that enthusiasm.
Right. Yeah.
But we have to try to think in a more grounded way, and to
Be more
also,
truthful. Yeah.
yes, to be more truthful. And the industry is maturing, and as we mature, we have to start thinking about scalable models. Other industries are looking at how to do more with less. Do we really need all these constellations, or will we see some consolidation? If we start to see consolidation with fewer satellites, that's going to really lower the launch cadence. Starship itself will, because you'll have 150 metric tons on one satellite. So all these factors need to be considered. And I think we're going to have to live through this time of irrational exuberance and come out on the other side to rational exuberance, which we talk about. I wrote a paper with Brian Whedon, my colleague, about how to do that.
Well, there's a lot of irrational exuberance for AI right now, also the same thing, which we have to come out on the other side too.
Yes.
Do you consider the national security components of spaceport development?
Yeah, they don't want risk. They want to be able to launch when they need to launch. But does that really make a commercial model for the private sector? As I brought up to a colleague of mine, it's kind of like the federal highway system saying, we never want a traffic jam in the entire US. Therefore, we're just going to pave over the entire US because we never want a traffic jam. So we shouldn't do that with spaceports. In fact, some congestion is actually a sign of health. It means there's good utilization, good demand.
Right.
So some congestion is needed, but you talk to someone in the national security environment and they don't want to see any congestion. So they're erring on that side. But if you're a private developer and you've got skin in the game in terms of risk and investment, that's not what you should be thinking about. The national security folks are focused on, we need to launch when we need to launch.
Do they need more locations for national security, or are they happy with what exists now?
They want to see greater availability of the launch pads. maybe they're in just a few locations. As I mentioned earlier, there's significant demand at 2 of our spaceports. So if they could see greater efficiency and greater increased cadence at those 2 spaceports, perhaps that will solve their problems versus just citing more spaceports.
So do you see anything on spaceport availability constricting new rocket development? Because there's lots of companies that claim they're building new rockets and are entering this size of rocket or that size of rocket. And I think they think that there's going to be sufficient launch capacity to launch their rockets, plus sufficient demand, customers wanting their services. So I know this is kind of indirect at spaceports, but how do you see all of this demand that people think is going to happen? And when people do reports on the space show every year about the launch rate, and SpaceX leads this or China does this or whatever, it's always very, very glowing, and it's only going to go one direction. And so I would imagine this affects the planning and the thinking and the assumption making of a spaceport. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know how real the demand is. So I want to tell another story. So earlier in space show history, before Loral became, I think it's NDC or something out of Canada, that before they merged, I had a friend and a space show guy at Loral, and I made several trips down to their high bay to see them making the really, really big geo satellites. And they put me in a clean uniform and a whole kit and caboodle. I mean, this was the real McCoy of the big geos. So what has happened is that a lot of the smaller satellites and the ability of smaller electronics that can do more have actually changed the demand of these really huge satellites. So as we develop technology and skills and miniaturization, and you have more vehicles capable of doing this, so more supply should, in theory, lower costs, right? And if you lower some costs, you're not going to be quite as profitable on each launch, and that may mean that some companies don't survive. So it seems to me that this is like, the leg bone's connected to the elbow bone and all that stuff. And technology is changing demand curves. So how do you incorporate that, or do you, in spaceport planning?
Well, it needs to be incorporated for long-term demand forecasts. And you mentioned GEO. One of the things that's interesting about that is, first of all, a GEO satellite lasts 20 plus years often. And I am starting to see more multi-orbit constellations, and that could lower maybe the demand for LEO, as LEO works with MEO and GEO to kind of create a broader capability within a constellation. So that might help dampen demand a little bit. We might also see some consolidation in the industry, so that could help lower demand with fewer players. There's so many moving pieces. All I can think about is back in the 90s, I invested heavily in various companies with fiber build out, thinking that's the direction, if you look at fiber. And ultimately, it's the applications. And after I lost a lot of money as an investor, someone said, it's the applications, stupid. So as we think about launch, which is very much at the beginning of the value chain, think about what are we doing in space? Think about the remote sensing, broadband capabilities, et cetera. Is there enough demand for these satellites? I am not convinced there's a huge demand for worldwide global coverage for broadband. Iridium provides global coverage, and they do it with narrowband for logistics tracking. But if you're in the middle of the Pacific, do you need, high-speed broadband? I'm not convinced there's a huge market for that. So ultimately, it starts with the applications and then working your way back, going, what types of satellites, how many do you need? And of course, consolidation in the industry could also dampen demand. I would hope that satellite operators will start building satellites that last longer as well. We need to join the rest of industry in terms of the circular economy and doing more with less. So I hope that happens as well.
I mean, I'd like to see some of the business plans for some of what is being proposed. But one of the things we talk about with commercial space is that it's a market of telecommunications. So and maybe AJ or Amir can comment on this, where are all these commercial markets and users? So it's almost like if you build it, they will come. But where are the money-making opportunities short of telecoms or some derivative of telecoms? And that would seem to me to be a key to whether you need more spaceport capacity and where you want that spaceport. Does anyone have a comment on that?
Um, well, I guess I would be very reticent about over exuberance on that scale also at the same time, So I don't think all these things that, for example, this 1 million data centers or whatever it is that Elon Musk has talked about, that type of thing is not going to happen. I don't think so. And, try to build airports or spaceports based on that is not a wise thing at this point in time.
Well, I know we talk about all these businesses that are going to emerge from lunar traffic, maybe on orbital construction, all sorts of different opportunities, cislunar opportunities, but we don't have any customers for any of this. So
Yeah,
if we do, I don't recognize them. I don't know them. I would like to have them on the space show, but there's
yeah,
plenty of customers for derivatives of telecom. So
yeah.
Right.
There is, yeah. And for you take the example of moon development, for example. Um, One of the things that I've been talking about, is use Falcon Heavy with maybe 3-4 launches of Falcon Heavy to go to lunar surface directly with cargo. Now, that may sound like it's a good big thing or something, but it really is not in terms of spaceports. It's just still, you will be able to, you'll probably end up doing maybe one time type of a thing every few months at the most, something like that. So that doesn't really require. So lunar economy, cislunar economy, etc., is also not going to require a huge input or huge availability of spaceports, I would think. And so, I mean, at least I can conjecture only for next 10, 15 years. I don't know what it would be like 20, 30 years from now. Things can change, although I doubt it. But to answer your question, David, I mean, I think that there isn't a hell of a lot more of that available.
I'm all for future planning and trying
Yeah,
to estimate the needs of the future. And I hope cislunar and lunar and some of the things we talk about do develop.
yeah,
If you're building capacity today for something that may develop, which is speculative and risky tomorrow, if I were being given that business plan to look at, um, I don't really know how I would be able to easily evaluate that. I'd probably evaluate it on the basis of the people involved. And do they have track records for making visionary projects come to life? And
I agree with that, David. It's like I would never bet against Elon Musk. I think that's just a good investment. Whatever he says, I think he'll make it happen. Now, that doesn't mean that he won't make a mistake sometime, but I think the man is such a good thinker that I think he's probably thought all this stuff through. On the other hand, losing a few billion dollars, maybe he doesn't mind that much about that. You know, maybe he's willing to take the risk. But I personally wouldn't bet against him. I think he's probably thought about this stuff. And if he hasn't, of course, he has people who have. But I don't know. What do you think, Karen?
Well, certainly he's been successful, but I see risk. I see risk in how we've built possibly a house of cards with the space economy. If you look at it and you look at, always having to come up with a reason to build launch, for instance. And it's like he's trying to create his own markets. And, we're stacking up this very, very vertically integrated company. And SpaceX is extremely vertically integrated, starting with the parts, moving to the rocket, moving to Starlink and upwards. And ultimately to the customer, which is where you generate the revenue. And what's a little bit perplexing is I'm not seeing the end game necessarily. I'm not so sure that the end market is going to rationalize that entire vertical chain of investments. And I know that from personal experience with the way I got burned during the early internet days. And so I always look at the whole chain. And so it still needs to play out. But I'm skeptical about a house of cards.
Amir, you want to enter in?
Yeah, you asked before about how many spaceports we might need and how we can estimate that. I think there are two separate questions. One is the total capacity of the spaceports, and one is the location of where one should be, where there should be more spaceports. And it seems like the total capacity has to do with the total market for satellites, because we don't really care very much where the satellite was launched from, if we just want it to be in orbit. But in terms of the locations of the spaceports, it probably has to do with the location of where the satellites are being manufactured, because carrying them around over the surface of the Earth is kind of expensive. Karen, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's getting more regional as we see it play out right now. The geopolitics or geoeconomics is really, really intensifying. Europe wants their own launch sites. Europe wants to build their own satellites. So we're starting to see sovereign interests take hold. We're certainly seeing it with Canada. They decided Telesat, we can take that on with Telesat Lightspeed and go up against Starlink. Well, Canada was the #1 market for Starlink. That might be an exaggeration, but it was a big market. And the Canadians are building their own broadband constellation. I realize it's more for enterprise versus consumer, but we're starting to see other countries say, we can do this too. And as we start to think about the heated geopolitics right now, it's empowering these other countries to compete against the US.
Yeah, right.
We're seeing other countries like England, Scotland, other areas, Denmark, they all want spaceports. They don't have robust launch industries that I can tell. Launching an American rocket in the UK or Scandinavia, I don't see that. The logistics of getting the American rocket and the infrastructure over there, plus ITAR issues that you would run into, don't really lend themselves to anything like that. But they want to get in on the act, right? They signed the Artemis Accords. They want to get in on the act. This is going to be the next big, trillion-dollar economy. Did you look at spaceports in other countries? Are they misguided? Are they able to use sound planning and economic? Because most of this is public money. I'm not seeing private sector rushing to build spaceports in other countries. What can you say about that?
I think they've made some of the same mistakes that the US planners made as well. I mean, It's funny, but I definitely saw some of the same mindset. Certainly, Dr. Priyanka Dope brought up a site in Australia, Mahia, and some of the planning that went into it with a certain lack of transparency. We saw it with Prestwick Spaceport in the UK, which used a grant to really keep pushing forward an idea that didn't really make sense. So we see that really across the board. It's not just the US, making some of these mistakes. Having said that, they are now more motivated, given the geoeconomic situation, to develop their own sites to support their own civil and defense missions.
Yeah.
I know we talked about an hour and we're there. Is there anything we've omitted or that you wanted to say that we've forgotten to talk about or should have talked about?
I don't know. I think we covered the ground pretty well. I think we're all keyed in on market exuberance. It would be interesting to come back in a year and go, okay, what did we get right, and how have things changed?
I guess I could, in order to look at the exuberance, have you tried to compare and contrast, say, entrepreneurial and private sector exuberance to government exuberance? And we'll keep it narrowly focused to spaceports, for example.
I think they're tied together too closely. If you look at the space industry, it's hard to differentiate the two. I'm seeing exuberance on both sides at this point.
Do you have a sequel plan for this paper in a year?
We should probably do that. I think, and it would be fun to expand the scope, given that two of the authors are from the US. We had a slight US-centric focus. I'd love to expand and explore South America, for instance. There's some good spaceport sites there, certainly in Australia.
Exactly.
So I'd love to see a wider geographic focus. We tried to cover the world. It's hard to in one paper.
Well, if you do a sequel, let us know. I'd love to cover it again. AJ, you want
Okay.
to say something?
I just want to ask, is this paper available? I mean, is the link available on the website,
Yeah,
David?
AJ, I
Yeah.
put it up on the blog and on
Okay.
Substack. Come on,
Right.
get
I
with it,
haven't.
man. Get with it.
There's a copy.
We'll do that.
Amir, do you have anything else that you want to add or Sherry?
Just one thing that I don't think we talked about equatorial spaceports for equatorial launches as something specific that might be needed. So what do you think, Karen?
Well, Australia has a good site. I think that's where we might see some more offshore situations emerge potentially as well. But yeah, and of course you have Boca Chica, the private spaceport, and it's not exactly equatorial, but it's pretty far south. So that's increasing its cadence significantly.
Yeah,
So
I would think Africa would be able to contribute something here if people would want to do that.
Yes.
years ago when I was teaching at North Dakota in their space studies department, Gwen Shotwell was a guest lecturer for my class. And I asked her how they plan to launch eastward from Boca over the Gulf of Mexico, given the quantity of oil rigs in the Gulf. And what kind of channel did they have from the FAA or corridor where they could do this? Plus, Mexico is just down the street. And she laughed about it and said, very carefully. So I don't know what the capacity for Boca Chica would be to up their quantity a lot, because the Gulf, if you look at the nighttime of the Gulf and satellite pictures and you see all these these are oil rigs that are all over the Gulf of Mexico. And some of them have hundreds of people on board those oil rigs that are running them. So you really, if you're going to destroy a rocket over the Gulf of Mexico, you really don't have a lot of corridor space to do it. So I think Boca would be limited, and probably just because of the nature of the Gulf of Mexico, and I don't see the oil rig count diminishing, and I don't see the proximity of Mexico changing much either.
And Mexico's actually not very happy with a lot of the debris that's been washing up on their shores.
Yeah, I would imagine that they would not be. Yeah. Well, we look forward to your update, and hopefully you will do it. I want to thank you for returning to the space show. And listeners, you can get uh, the Aerospace, it's called the Center for Space Policy and Strategy email with their papers that they produce. You can sign up for that for free. And I get all of their papers, and many of them are interesting, and many of their authors have been on the space show. It's a great source of information for the space show. If you don't access that, I think you're really missing out on something. So again, check it out. Thank you very much, and until the next time. And spatial people, stay on board for a few minutes, okay? Thank you again, Karen.
Thank you,
Thank
Karen.
you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Listeners, a couple of real quick things. Uh, Andy Fracknoid, the astronomer, who's well known on the Pacific Coast, probably every other place, is our Sunday guest. There's a great lunar eclipse coming up. I think it's actually early in the morning when Andy is on the show. So he wants to talk about the total lunar eclipse and how you can see it if you don't mind losing a lot of sleep, and other astronomical things. And then I am gone from Tuesday through Sunday back to UCLA for my speaking and hearing issues that I'm wrestling back, probably chasing rainbows on, but what the hell. And then we come back the following Tuesday. And don't forget, we're a 501c3, and we raise money. We're listener supported. And if you like what we're doing, PayPal is on the right upper side of our homepage, thespaceshow.com. If you use Substack, they have their own fundraising program with Stripe. So I suggest you follow the Substack rules, but you can always just go to thespaceshow.com and use Zelle, which uses David at onegiantleapfoundation.org, or you can use PayPal. Either way, but we are listener supported, and we hope you will join us. And we do have sponsors. I know it's late, but this guy right here is one of our sponsors. So I want to shout out to Dr. Kathari for his hypersonic company, Astrox, Astrox, which is a sponsor. And uh, Amir is a great friend, and so is Dr. Sherry Bell. So everyone have a great weekend coming up, and thank you for being with us on this Thursday Space Show program. And until Sunday, when Andy Fracknoy, the astronomer, is back with us. Goodbye, everybody, and once again, thank you to Karen, and we appreciate it.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.